You guys don't need to talk for a minute. I'm just going to say, hi, everybody that's joined us. I'm going to step away and we're going to begin, but welcome and thanks for being here online.
Hi.
I just lost the sheet of paper. Stephen, it should be right behind.
Know this by heart.
I'm like, I sort of do. Yes. Oh, I don't need to stand here. Well, you stand right there. Thank you for coming to Bird's Books. I know that there's many of you that are here for the first time, and I'm going to give you the 2-minute elevator speech. Just because I think it's important for people to understand how important it is that so many bookstores survive the pandemic. It's not a small thing. I will say that we've been in business over 11 years. We started up the street at a different location as at least one of our audience members went to the old one because she was used to being there. So that was fun. But in any case, Bird's Books started in 2011 when Borders closed. And I had formerly opened the Barnes & Noble in Danbury, which I think was the second or third superstore in the country. So I knew what corporate bookselling was. I had just come out of office. I used to be the first selectman here in Bethel. And I wanted to find a new path forward, and this was it. What we decided to do was open a very small bookstore highlighted with author events. And so long story short, here we are. And this seems to be the size that Bethel's most comfortable with, sandwiched in between a Barnes & Noble and a Costco. So everybody knows what corporate bookselling is, and independent bookstores are not. One of the things that people are always surprised is that we don't discount. We sell books at what it is printed. And the reason for that is that we pay taxes, we pay employees, we pay all the things that online sellers just don't have the opportunity to. But the one thing that they don't have is community, and that is what we have. So thank you for coming for Gabi. Thank you for coming for us. Thank you for looking at my little store. My son Steve and I have run it for a long time together, and we really enjoy it. We hire local teenagers. We support soccer and all that stuff that everybody hopes for a community store. I know Cindy from before, and I'm glad to have you as new friends. Just to kind of let you know that we're serious about staying in business. The trade is up and down all the time, but most of the time you will see that little independents are still here. We're members of the American Booksellers Association and the New England Independent Booksellers Association. So whenever I ask you what's your local independent, it's because I really want to see my friends flourish too. And that goes from RJ Julia, who is the mothership basically of Connecticut, to our little store, which is where the littlest. We're having a 16-store book crawl next Saturday on Independent Bookstore Day. So wherever you live, go to your local independent and tell them how much you love them, because we're still here. And I'm finding that a lot of the corporate folks end up in the bookstores too. So it's a big fun day. A lot of people are signing all over the country. And it used to be that authors came into bookstores and helped sell off the floor, and it sort of migrated into author signing moments. So it's a lot of fun. So don't miss it. I want to introduce, for those of you who have not read Gabi's bio, I love that you wrote this. I think it's a scream. Unlike many writers, I can't write in coffee shops because they're too distracting, and I only drink coffee as a last resort. I live in Connecticut in a cottage that's American on the outside and English on the inside. If I'm not reading, writing, or traveling, you'll find me in my flower garden holding a cup of my preferred beverage, a strong English tea, and wondering whether to do some reading. Thank you for coming, and thank you for the raffle.
Thank you, everybody, and thank you to my friends and people that I don't know online. That's so lovely to see how many of you are here. It's wonderful. Hey, yes, hello. I can see you waving. That's cool. Thank you, and thank you to the people who are here, which is just wonderful. As some of you probably know, this is my first published novel. I have two others very bad ones sitting in a drawer in my desk. And the first one I started writing on a bus in Vietnam, as you do. Because there's this thing called NaNoWriMo, which is November, when you're supposed to be able to write 50,000 words of a novel in the shortest month of the year, and the one with Thanksgiving in it, so the least possible time. And because I happened to be in Vietnam that day, and we were taking some kind of bus trip, I took my little tiny portable computer those days and started writing on the bus. I don't think it improved the book at all because my typing was already bad. And doing this on the bus didn't help very much. But and then when I ran the books by my critique groups, they didn't really care for the characters all that much. So I was like, anyway, suffice it to say that this book, I started after I finished my memoir and was looking for something else to write. And my memoir is about my husband and me, and it ended up with his death. And the reason for this book is that people kept coming up to me and saying, so when are you going to start dating? And I'm like, really? You know, men are such hard work. Sorry. The women understand. No, and so that was the first thing. And the second thing they asked me was, what do you think happens to people if you don't believe in heaven? Which was a much more serious question in a way. But my own personal belief is that the people you love are always with you, and they don't just suddenly disappear. You carry them with you. And I don't know about other people, but I have had conversations with people I love long after they were gone. And so I thought, I'm going to answer both of these questions in this novel, sort of. And so it starts with Molly. Molly's the heroine. She owns a little bookstore like this one. And she's got an unscrupulous landlord, the sort of guy who twirls his moustache and says, you must pay the rent, you must pay the rent. And she's like, I can't pay the rent, I can't. Anyway, at the same time, he thinks he can date her by going online and putting a different, much older picture of himself up there. And so she's got that on the one hand, and she's got her other friends who are saying, okay, it's time for you to go online. We're going to help you. We're going to get you online. You'll love this. And as she's looking at someone online, she hears a voice behind her in the kitchen, and it says, you can't go out with him. He's 70 if he's a day. And she turns around, and who should it be but the ghost of her dead husband, who says, and I'll read you a little bit of what he says, not a lot, but just a bit, because it's not a secret that there's a ghost in the book. Molly stared, then she blinked. He was seeing things. She spoke to Simon often, yet he never initiated a conversation, and he'd certainly never appeared before. Hi, he said, like someone who'd been outside for a minute and wandered back in. She gulped. Then she moved her body to try and block his view of the screen, which made no sense because this couldn't be happening. What are you doing here? She felt her eyes welling up. She must be hallucinating. I've been keeping an eye on you, you know, he announced, as though this were an ordinary conversation between husband and wife at the end of a long day. Molly wanted to stand, to walk toward him, to see if this vision was real, but her legs seemed to have turned to jelly. She took in a breath and held it while she counted to 10. She blinked again. He was still there. Didn't you feel me, keeping you company? All those conversations she had with him in her mind. I suppose so. I thought, because I loved you so much, that you would always be with me, in my heart, that is. But I never actually thought I'd see you again. A tear began to make its way down her cheek. I know. Simon's voice, so familiar, so kind. Molly looked up through her tears and could make out the look of concern on the face she knew so well. I'm only here because I love you, sweetie. Yes, but don't you want me here? Irritation tinged his words. Of course I do. Was that true? It had been 3 years. This was so much to process. This was different. This wasn't only Simon's voice in her head. He was here in person, so to speak. Why now? She asked. Yeah, well, probably tells you this before you go, but you have to pass a kind of test. The hell is he talking about? Everyone who passes over has to do a final good deed for the one they love best before they can move on. Molly digested this for a moment. She shook her head. She must be imagining this. No, he was still standing there. Half of her wanted to reach out and touch him. The other half didn't want to do anything that might make him disappear. Anyway, so they get to the point where they're asked, she asks him what kind of favor, and he tells her that he thinks it's to help her find a replacement husband for himself. But of course, not someone who's quite as good as him, you know. So that's how the book started, and I wrote it, and I got an agent. Hello. Hi, Henri. Come on in, sit down. I got an agent who loved it, partly because the first version of it was absolutely full of terrible, terrible dates that this poor girl had gone, and I rather think that the agent had been on a lot of dates exactly like that. So she sent it around to various publishers, and they liked it, but one of them was publishing a book with exactly the same title in the next 6 months, and somebody else had something different or didn't have room for their schedules. And the last person said, well, I want more bookshop in it, because, you know, people love bookshops. And also I want this woman to be a bit tougher. She keeps, you know, reacting to things instead of acting. So I went, okay. I went away and rewrote the book, sent it back, and I made her the owner of the bookstore now, using Alice as an inspiration, obviously. And so having done that, sent it back, and the woman who'd asked for the rewrite at a certain publisher had now moved away and had gone to another publisher and was now doing cozy mysteries. So my agent said, I don't suppose you could rewrite this as a cozy mystery, could you? And I said, I'm pretty sure I actually can't. But anyway, the story of this and how it got to finally get published is a long and winding road. But it's been a lot of fun, a lot of learning. And I just want to point out, and I'm sorry you won't be able to see them online, but these are the people that I've dedicated the book to, and this is why. So let me read it so I don't make a mistake. Here we go. For Madeline and Charlotte, who started bragging that I was a writer while they were in elementary school. And they did. They kept going to school and telling people that their grandmother was a famous writer, even though it hadn't been published at all. So for their faith in me, I did this. And also because I didn't name check them in my memoir, which came out last year. And I name checked the other grandchildren, who, by the way, wanted to know how many times I'd name checked them and how many lines they had in the book. They're very competitive, but these two did not. So now they've got their very own book, just for them. What else can I tell you? Does anybody have any questions that I can answer about the story? The kind of tea I have here? Yes.
Does your novel reflect your own personal life? I mean, obviously the memoir talks about you.
Yes, no, only to the extent that I wanted to kind of send a gentle message to my friends that it was fine with me if I never went on an online date, because there are still some pretty horrible ones in here. And also that I think Molly, the main character, she has her work and so on and so forth. And that's the other part of the story, is how she manages to get a grip on that and save her bookshop. And oops, given that away. But anyway, I didn't kill a bookshop. Oh, by the way, when I finally got the second version done, it was called A Bookshop of Second Chances, because it couldn't be the same. And then the publisher said, well, no, actually, we're tired of bookshop titles, so can you? Which is why this is what it's called. Yeah, I know. Yes, I can spot irony when it hits me in the face. Definitely. So this is why it's called A Beginner's Guide to Starting Over. I don't know if there are any questions on Zoom either. Is there any way to find out, Steve? or not?
Maybe, but I have a question first.
Yes,
Can you talk about your publishing journey? Like, how did you find an agent? How did you find, how did you?
how did it go?
What the process for you?
So finding an agent is really difficult, and it's what we in Britain refer to in polite company as a crapshoot. There's just no knowing. There are people who are really organized and send out, 50 requests at a time to various agents. And there are others who like the sound of one agent will send them one thing. There are other people who go to pitch contests where you get to meet an agent and sit with them and pitch them your book. And I did most of those things, not the 50 mailings. I'm just not that kind of optimist. But in the end, as I've heard this so often from writers, it was an introduction from a friend of mine whose agent this was, who said to her agent, I think you'd like this book. And sure enough, she liked the sound of it, and I sent it to her and she said, yes, I'd love to represent you. So there's an enormous amount of luck in publishing. I don't think anybody here who's right, if luck is such a big thing in the business because there are millions of books being published every year. So competition is huge. The big 5 publishers make all their money off 4% of the books that they publish. The rest sell fewer than 2,000 copies each, 96% of them, which is ridiculous. So the willingness to take chances on books. So having found that I couldn't go with the big publishers, I got a, this is the best thing I've read all year, but my schedule is full until 2025 from another publisher. And so there are all those kinds of things. And the clock was ticking. I'm ancient. And I still didn't have a debut novel, it was pretty sad really. And I thought, oh, the hell with this. I'll find a small publisher. And there are essentially 2 sorts of small publishers. One is a small publisher, like a traditional publisher. They don't usually give you an advance or anything exciting like that, but they will do all the printing work and they'll take control of your book and get it out there. And then there's the other kind of small publisher where you give them some money to help you publish your book, and they do all the hard work, the design work. I scream at them because I don't like that and this and that and the other, but they do it. And that's becoming a more popular version for people who can't wait for 2 years for a book to come out because,
But there's always the gamble, because most independent bookstores that I know hesitate, or don't take
right.
self-published books. And the only reason for that is purely economics, because they can hear me. The discount that we get to stay in business, most self-published authors cannot give to the bookstore. And we need to stay in business, so either they make the money or we do. So they also become their own publicists.
Yes,
And that's a problem for some people.
that's also true of big authors. I mean, the really big ones don't have to bother with publicity because people are waiting for their next book. But those in the mid-range do a lot of their
Musicians
own.
too. I mean,
Yes,
yeah, I mean, it's.
But I'm finding people, I got probably 3 or 4 emails today from mid-list authors that were published from Simon or from Harper
right.
that called me and said, my book is coming out, blah, blah, blah. And I'm going,
Yes,
where's your, I mean.
yes.
So what- that
And
leads
the
us to the
third
question.
thing- The third thing, though, is that a lot of the institutional knowledge is retiring. And what they're not doing, and I had a long talk with somebody from Penguin Random House about 6 months ago. With the retired institutional knowledge, they're not bringing in people that are interning for jobs,
Right.
where they're learning. Because
Yeah.
Alyssa Altman, who you just missed, was here, and her book came out, and they had turfed it to somebody new who didn't know to ask Alyssa for her list. And 5% of the people they sent the advance to were dead.
Oh,
So that was Valentine, that's
Yeah,
big dogs,
yeah.
I mean.
So
So
my,
it can happen anywhere. I mean, it's always been one of those, where do you find your?
How important is your age in your public?
Distinct, a clarifying question about like traditional self-published, but the hybrid, which I think is,
yes.
like that has traditional distribution, is that kind of more attractive to a bookseller?
One of the things that, first of all, it has to be listed on Ingram, because what a lot of authors don't know is that Ingram is the mechanism by which we people our website. The mechanics of how books load onto our website comes through what they call fetch on Ingram. So when I add a books to my, as an author event or whatever, it comes through mechanically, electronically from Ingram.
It's
So
still the largest book distributor
in the world.
Like,
Yes, he was absolutely right.
considering all the other people that deal with selling books,
Right.
them who shall not be named included, like Ingram is still the biggest book distributor in the world. So
There's a lot
It is
to learn
important.
about that whole thing, and I happen to like learning stuff.
But
which
you
is
have
good.
so many writers in the room, I figured I would volunteer
Yeah,
that.
no.
It's not that. I mean, for people who are local, who are friends that are gonna have their friends and celebrate a book, of course. We love having authors here. The difficulty is that the children's authors that come in, that have gotten their friend's child to illustrate their book. I'm not gonna give table space to, because I don't have room. And third, find out it's not even on the spine.
No, exactly.
And third, please edit your book before you bring it to anybody. I mean,
Oh,
there's
well, yeah.
always a process
Yes.
with people,
Yes.
and you just can't self-edit.
See, it's tough being a small bookstore, and as my heroine finds out, but also as it's in fact true, because even in my book, there are people who come by looking for a book and then write some notes and walk off, and we know that they're not buying them in the bookstore. So Molly knows this too.
That's why we get nuts when people come in and start taking pictures of books. And I usually say, oh, can we help make a list for you? Can we,
Yeah.
because often, particularly kids, well, let's just get it off of Amazon, and they don't realize what they're saying.
sometimes providing the best customer service is not just, providing the best customer
Although
service. It's
you-
also stopping people from abusing like the
But
location.
also what you did was, I remember you hand sold a book by a friend of mine, which was a steampunk novel, right? Not very well known as a genre, and steampunk is a lot of fun and everything, but it's not everybody's cup of tea. And I happened to be here with the author, and two high school girls walked in on the last day of school or something, and she was signing books over there for Alice to have, and I said to the girls, I don't suppose you'd like a steampunk book, would you? And they went, well, yeah, that might be good. I said, because if you buy it now, the author will sign it over to you. And at that point, they practically fainted. But that's the thing that Alice can do, that is to hand sell a book, to recommend a book to people, and to find the right book for the right person, right?
Correct.
Which
absolutely.
is why she's going to love this, because for the beach, actually, it's a light read. But yes, Sally.
Did Molly bring any insights to you?
Well, yes, actually, the very fact that when I first wrote her, of course, there's something of yourself in the book. The very fact that when I first wrote her, some of the readers thought she was a little bit too too quiet, hadn't got quite enough sort of oomph, and I thought to myself, I never thought of myself as a person who didn't have any oomph, frankly, but apparently that's what was coming over. And I realized that maybe when it comes to heavy-ish emotional things, I do tend to rather stand back. It's something to do with being British, I think. It's just like we don't address this head on. We go full stiff upper lip, so we could barely talk like that, And so yes, I did learn, because I had to make her a more proactive person. But yeah, and I learned from writing the other characters. There's she has a gay employee at the bookstore, and there's a coffee shop next door with a person from Brazil, and so on and so forth. So I had to get readers to read this to tell me that I hadn't actually made a terrible faux pas. And one of the first things, so I said to my gay friend, I'm not gonna say, this friend of mine who happens to be gay, I said, would you mind reading the book? Because, you know, I just have written it the way it would probably work in England, but I'm not sure whether it works here. And I said, you know, I need some information about how Thanksgiving would go if you've got a whole lot of people. And he said, well, one thing we never do at parties is we never play charades. And I went, oh no, right. Crossing it out like at full speed because I just couldn't, you know. But those are the kinds of faux pas. So I tried to include enough diverse people that I felt I had knowledge of and to run things by them. Because, you know, I want my book to feel like a real place, and there are real people from other countries originally who live in our neck of the woods.
Elizabeth Chatworth asked online, could this be the beginning of a series?
Oh, well, it's funny you should say that. So one of the characters in this book is based on a 90-year-old friend of mine. Well, she's 93. She claims she's 82. And she wears picky long stocking tights, mini skirts, high heels, and little fur jackets. And she does tend to totter a bit more than she used to. But when I was writing it, I thought I'm going to include a character just like her. I wanted someone a little eccentric in the book. So I put this character in, Elaine. She runs an egg farm and so on and so forth. And people like this character really a lot. She has barely anything to do in this book. So, and also I set my actual friend Elaine. Why did I use the same name? It was a placeholder originally, but she said, can I read it? So I said, certainly. And as I hit send, I went, oh, bad language. This is not going to be good. So luckily, you know what? She didn't recognize herself. This is very she actually has the same name. But she calls herself Lainey, but you know, and this was a Swedish person, and Lainey is not a Swedish person. But anyway, so yes, but people love this character, my critique groups and beta readers and so on. So I thought, well, I'll write a short story about that character so that if people want to be on my mailing list, I can send it to them as a sort of thank you. Well, the short story got longer and longer and longer. So there's well over half a novel there featuring Elaine. And so yes, there will be, and there's another one based on the library in town, which
well, Frederick Bachman's made a career out of telling a story and taking a peripheral character and making a whole nother story out of it.
yes,
It's a very common use of
exactly.
great characters,
Yeah.
particularly when you're not done with them yet.
No, quite. Well, you know, sometimes they just won't lie down and die, even if you want them to. But yeah, no, and it's fun, you know, because your town gets a bit bigger. So for this one, I was getting confused about where all the houses and the shops were and everything. So I sketched out a map and it still wasn't helping me very much. So I went online and found an illustrator whose job is to do wedding maps, right? So wedding maps, in case you don't know, are the things that are beautifully painted for people to tell them how to get from their hotel to the reception, the rehearsal dinner, to the church, to the reception, to the, yes, you know, John and Cynthia or whatever. And then this beautiful map. So I found one and I said, this isn't quite the same. It's an imaginary town in Connecticut. And she said, that's absolutely fine. And I realized she was in India. So I sent her some pictures of little houses in Connecticut and stuff so she would know. And she produced a map for me. So now I've got a map with places that need people in them. So that's another thing. But I don't know if this is the right place to confess something about this book. Oh.
Are there two chairs back there?
There's one right in this.
There's one.
Okay, there's one. Okay.
So
There's one and one. I do have another question. Well, no, there's one here up front and there's one here up front. Right.
Yes. So, I just quickly say that the town in this book is called Brentford, which when you pronounce it in English, sounds like Brentford. However, after I'd written the book and it was all in the process of being published, I mentioned it to somebody American and they said, Brantford? And I said, oh God, no, they pronounce it
Oops.
Brantford. If you say Brentford, an American will say Brantford, and Brantford happens to be an actual small town, also not far from New Haven in Connecticut, with a lot of similarities. It is missing a bookstore in case you ever want to
Oh,
add
no.
one. But I'd never been there, so I had no idea. And I was there the other day, and when I looked at the historical plaque, it said, this town was named after Brentford in England. There is nothing new in the world.
There is another question online.
Yes.
What was the most challenging part of writing a novel compared to writing a memoir, aside from the fact the memoir is about you and the novel is based on fictitious characters?
Actually, I think writing a memoir is probably harder because it's about you and because, as people said to me halfway through, you've got to bleed on the page. And I said, I'm British, I don't bleed on the page. But it's very good practice for writing a book with emotions in it. So the thing about writing a novel is novels are expected to have a certain kind of structure, you know, stuff has to happen at certain points in the book and so on. And the way I write, stuff is just going on and on and on and round, and I have to go back afterwards and start adding things to the story. But I like editing. A lot of people hate editing, but I happen to love it because that leaves me free to write badly. And anyone who's ever written with me will know that that is my motto, that people should write badly. And so I find that very easy to do, and then I edit it to make it better. So the difference is not huge because the memoir these days also is easier to read if it reads more like fiction. You know, it's not an autobiography which has to have, you know, all the bibliography and stuff at the back. No, you're allowed to make stuff up in a memoir, which is exactly what you're allowed to do in a novel. And by make stuff up, I mean remember things other people don't remember is what I mean.
And that was from Marina, and this one is from Stuart. Gabi has spoken highly of a hybrid publisher who did her previous book. What motivated her to seek an agent and go in another direction? Compare royalties in both arrangements.
Oh, good Lord.
You can flog him later.
I've kind of covered that a bit, really.
Yeah.
But the royalties, it depends on the company that you go with, really. So there's no one answer. But thank you for trying to get one out of me. Yes,
Yeah, you talked about about the Fords,
yes,
and you also mentioned that you were using a real life character as a basis for
Yeah.
a fictional character.
yes.
Is there a problem in doing that? That the mayor of Brantford sends you a letter and says, you said that,
Yes,
you know, this sounds like our town, and you say that everybody there is crazy or something.
yeah, that's the point at which you have the thing in the front of the book that says any resemblance. But the fact is, I was anxious about it because I'm supposed to be signing, there's a book fest in Brantford in 2 weeks' time. And I said I'd go and, you know, sell books there and things. And then I saw this notice and I went, oh my God, they're going to lynch me. They're going to hate this. But another friend of mine said, you know, I'd lead with that. Just tell them that you
Oh,
love this little town
absolutely.
so much.
There is no bad press.
Right, and it is a delightful town, luckily. So, yeah, that's,
The little legend is good enough.
yes, and
That hides all
Well, you-
sins.
And
And
this
it's
is
saying
a-
loosely based really covers your sins.
yes, and it's also, I think Elaine would be delighted actually, because this character is a very lovable character. So, there's nothing that I would take back if I thought that she really was going to recognize herself. It's fine. You know, her friends and family will not be insulted. So, Any other questions for people?
Yeah.
Oh, yes, Alex.
Tell me about the difference between writing and reading for a writer's group of a memoir, versus writing and reading for the novel.
Between writing and reading for a writer's critique group.
Right.
Yeah. Well, I've been in the critique group for a long time, and the people in the critique group know me, so that when I was reading them parts of my memoir, they were very good at calling me out on it. Right? Are you sure? When you're right, when I give them my fiction, they're quite good about telling me that I'm not making myself clear, that I'm using English expressions that most people won't get, and those kinds of things. But critique groups are always a bit tricky because they're only seeing a part of your book at a time.
Well, that was the question. I mean, follow the plot of the novel through a weekly or monthly group.
Right.
It must be harder.
It is harder, but
It's
then
not just writing anecdote.
no, that's right. So it's just a question of reminding them what happened before, showing them this, and knowing that's not the final thing. After you've got something, then it goes to an editor. You know, this is just to help you to get it done because they're expecting to see something every week.
Did you read the novel sequentially in the writer's critique group?
Yes. Yes.
Carla said, the town is a lovable character too.
Oh, thank you, Carla. That's very nice. Carla's the author of a terrific novel called The Orchid Tattoo.
And are you planning an audiobook?
Well, as some of you know, I recorded my audiobook for my memoir because I could get away with it with this voice. But as you just heard, my American accent is not exactly 100% authentic, so I can't do it. So I'm looking at various ways of getting an audiobook. One is to find a reader who do it for me. And here's another bizarre idea. Apple is now allowing you to record it using artificial intelligence. And we certainly need some kind of intelligence for this book. So it may as well be artificial. But the sound of the voices, then, you know, there are a couple of voices that you can choose from. They're really scarily not bad. They're good enough for people to be able to listen to it and get the plot. It's not good if you want Judi Dench, you know, but if you're happy to know what the story is, which a lot of people who listen to audiobooks are listening to it for the plot and something to do with the character development, but they don't much worry about how they sound unless it's very confusing to the reader.
I listen to a lot. I'll talk to you about that.
Yeah, me too.
I've listened to a lot of audio also, and it does present an interesting dilemma for the industry itself, because it is an entire leg of art.
Voice acting.
Voice acting
Yeah.
that is
Yes,
just.
yes. No, a good,
It's not really reading the book at the beginning, it was just, you
Yes.
find somebody with a good voice and they would read the book.
right.
But now they act it out and it's very
Yes,
different.
actors have ruined it for the rest of us, I think.
Well, I will often read a book if I recognize the audio, if I recognize the person who is the narrator.
Right.
That I really enjoy. Martha Hall Kelly has a great narrator. and
Yes.
There's a number of other people who, when I see that narrator, I know at least it's done well. Who knows what it'll do? They'll obviously not be part of the Audis when they give the awards at the end.
No, and I don't know, I haven't actually sent it in, I will send it to Tantor Audio, who are in Old Saybrook, I think.
Mhm.
And they will take a submission from a writer who's looking for an audiobook, and if they like it, they'll publish it. Then I don't have to worry about the thing. Except how they pronounce Brentford and Branford.
I think you get a little weird.
Yeah, you might be able to say something.
Yes, Sally.
Did you have a playlist that you were listening to while you were writing?
Well, no, I didn't, and that's an interesting thing. My heroine is about the age of my daughter. So I need to get hold of her and ask her what her playlist would be, because you know, Red Hot Chili Peppers, I don't know, it goes back to the eighties, the playlist for those characters would have to go back, because you know how it goes, the music that you like when you're 50 or whatever is the stuff that you really liked when you were 18 to 30 or something like that, so it's yeah. Not my area of expertise, sadly, but if I can do one, if my daughter will help me, I'll do one. She's already helped me with a recipe for a grapefruit margarita, which features in the book. And so I'll be sending that out to people who want it. Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
Any further questions?
Applause.
And you will sign books?
I'm happy to sign books. And if any of you on Zoom have ordered books and I run out today, I'll bring in some more on Wednesday and they'll get sent right out.
We'll take care of you, don't worry.
Now, we have one other question. She doesn't have to identify for the publisher of genre.